When I was a young adult, about 21 years old, I moved to San Francisco and I didn't know anybody. And one of the first things that I did when I moved, that first Sunday I was there, was go to the local Unitarian Universalist church, the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco. They had actually removed the church from their name because they had feelings about that word. Now, this church was different from ours in a lot of ways. This church had about 250 members, and so for reference, ours has a little bit more than 100. But that church, so it was considerably larger, and it was pretty hard to meet people when I walked in. And that's a big thing, right, when people go to church. I know that when I went, I wanted to meet people. That was a thing that I wanted to do. And in our faith, one of the foundational principles is getting to know other folks, understanding their inherent worth and dignity, embracing difference, right? So that connection and support of each other and of our spiritual growth. So one of the first things I did when I joined that church or started going to that church was join what's called the young adult group. The Unitarian Universalist Association defines young adult as 18 to 35. Which seems like a huge age difference, doesn't it? But at the church that I was at, there were very few people in that age range. So it's technically kind of a gap that a lot of Unitarian Universalist churches deal with, not having people in that age group. I think we don't necessarily have that same issue here. So I remember the very first meeting that I went to. I was pretty nervous, but we all sat in a circle. There were about 10 to 12 of us, and we ran around and shared our names. And this was, almost 20 years ago. Nobody was sharing their pronoun yet. And every Sunday after church, we'd all go out for lunch or go have a picnic. And it was a wonderful way to connect in this smaller group of people. And as time went on, I found myself having some Sundays that didn't really end. I would wake up, go to church, go to lunch, wander around the city, go for walks, go to other people's houses, end up at a bar that night. I even dated somebody who I met through the group for a while. I made friends in that young adult group that I'm still friends with today. Now this, of course, was the same church where when I became a member, an older woman looked at me and said, "You are becoming a member? How old are you?" Which is kind of a way of saying you don't belong. But of course, I did belong. Sometimes we say unwelcoming things to each other, right? And we're all working on that. When I told her I was 22, she looked a little surprised. I've always looked young. The other thing that I did when I joined this church was I joined a small group ministry, which is a group that met every 2 weeks for an hour and a half. And there were about 8 of us, and we would sit in a circle and have a facilitated conversation about what was going on in our lives, and listen to a short reading and discuss a topic and find times to go deeper with each other. And in that group, one of the facilitators was a woman named Allison. And she was in her 70s, and she had this wonderful flower tattoo on her arm, and she would talk to me about her complicated love life. And we got pretty close. She ended up inviting me to her family's Thanksgiving. I didn't have anywhere to go, and she would invite me. And when I introduced my mother to her, this woman said, "Oh, this is my darling, Otto." I was only at this church for 4 years, and I've been a minister at this one for longer, but the people I connected with there really made a lasting impact on me. It's part of the reason that I became a minister. Now, I bring up these groups, right, today on our fall invitational as we think about how we are invited to participate in the congregation, this young adult group, this small group ministry, because they were the backbone of how I was able to connect at a larger church. The young adult group, which connected me with those who were similar to me in age, and the small group ministry, which connected me with those who weren't. I was, of course, 22. The next youngest person was 30 years older than me. And I think it's time we figure out how we can do this at First Parish. We hit 100 members for the first time since I've been here this spring. The congregation was about 70 when I showed up. We've experienced lots of people coming and going, moving away. The pandemic and conflict that we have had people leave. but we've also had a lot of people join us. It used to be really easy to recognize all the faces on Sunday, and it's getting a little bit harder. This past Sunday, last week, I was really struck by the fact that I didn't know a good portion of the people, and I didn't have the opportunity to go around like I do at coffee hour and say, "Hi, I don't know you. What's your name?" One of the things I find really important and I really appreciate is this getting to know people, but it's getting harder to do that as there's getting to be more people. Now, of course, this is a wonderful problem to have. But if part of the point of coming to church is to connect, we need to figure out ways to scale that. Adrienne Marie Brown, in her book Emergent Strategy, talks about how we look to our natural world to help us figure out how to organize ourselves for movement building and communities. And she talks about fractals. I have a slide which shows what a fractal looks like. So this is a pattern that's found in nature, and what's important about it is it self-replicates itself at different scales, right? So at the smaller points, it's a reflection of this large circular pattern. So Adrienne Marie Brown says the large is a reflection of the small, okay? So how can we create small versions of what we want to see at church, in the city, or in our world at large, this world that we're hoping to create together? And in turn, how can we do that in these larger worlds? So speaking of small groups, next week we're going to have a book club based on Adrienne Marie Brown's book, so just a small plug to come to that. We have copies here. So I've been thinking a lot about, as we grow, how we can make this work for us, because right now we don't have really many small groups. With the exception of some of our groups for parents, we do have a group for BIPOC folks that doesn't meet really very frequently. But we don't have a lot of groups based on identity like this young adult group. And we don't currently have a small group ministry. This is something that I'm trying to start. You may have seen the survey, and some of you have filled it out. But I encourage you to. This is a wonderful way to connect with other people. Somebody told me they thought that small group ministry meant like sitting with somebody who's sick or pastoral care. It's not that. It's connecting with other people who are also part of the congregation. So I wonder what it would be like if we had more opportunities to connect in these ways. And there are these groups that are part of the Unitarian Universalist Association that we can also connect into to have smaller groups, right? Based on different theologies. We have a chapter of the Unitarian Universalist Pagans, but there could be a group for UU Jews, UU Christians, UU Humanists, and Atheists. We can have identity groups. Interweave is a group for LGBTQ folks. Equal Access, spelled with 2 U's because that's what we UUs do, is a group for folks who are disabled. Young adult groups for people who are 18 to 35. What if we had a seniors group? That would be so cool. Now, these are just ideas that I don't know if we have the critical mass for any of them, but I want to invite us to start thinking about this. Partially because these are groups that won't be led by me. Remember what we learned during the Time for All Ages? I am not in charge, despite this kind of idea that I am. I think especially folks who came from the Catholic faith or any other hierarchical faith kind of look to me as like he can make all the decisions. That's actually not true. You can fire me if you decide to come together and do that. But one of the benefits of these kinds of groups is that it allows you all to connect with each other and not through me. We're not just a community of people, we are a community of relationships between and among people. So how do we foster that? So today is our fall invitational. It's a time to invite each other into community and into these deeper relationships.